Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, October 24th, 23. Wow, not there yet. Today we're going to be talking about the Republican primary and whether or not it's time to conclude this very, very interesting and pretty much predetermined Republican primary that has been taking place over the past year on the GOP side. Now, on your screen right now is the New York Times qualification tracker for the next upcoming GOP primary debate that is set to take place on November 8th, 2023, the day after the Kentucky governor election, the Mississippi governor election, and numerous state legislative races, specifically also looking at Virginia is what we're going to be talking about in future videos, which will determine where the current state of the GOP is right now amidst a Donald Trump, Joe Biden expected re-election for either side of the aisle. Now, this GOP primary tracker shows us that just 4 Republicans, compared to 9 in the first debate, moving down to 7 and 6 because Donald Trump pulled out and decided he would not be participating in the debate, now down to 4, including Donald Trump, which makes it 5. We're narrowing down the field to a point where many of the candidates that are now being discussed in national polling don't even have the opportunity to present their case to the American public on the debate stage. And it begs the question, given that Donald Trump is now at the highest point ever in the primary process, with an average of 58.8% in national surveys, with a 45.8% lead over his closest second opponent, which is Governor Ron DeSantis from the state of Florida, should this primary be declared over? Now, I am someone who absolutely believes in the electoral process and the democratic process, but for all intents and purposes, I think that right now the mainstream media has shifted away from primary coverage and shifted more towards general election coverage. And the reason why that is because there seems to be no doubt in anyone's mind at this point in time that Donald Trump will be the Republican nominee for president. And you can also see this too. It's also those who are investing their money in political markets. The reason why I tend to at least put some say into what these betting markets have to say is because regardless of how you might feel, if you are investing money in a race, you want to be right. You want to be correct in your assumption, which means you're going to use a lot more reasoning than personal bias or personal thought into why you might think whichever candidate you are funneling sometimes hundreds to thousands of dollars into will become the next president or will become the GOP nominee. And as we can see, wasn't always this insurmountable lead for Donald Trump, even in earlier on in this year when he was FiveThirtyEight. Unfortunately, we don't have them right here, but you can see that Donald Trump has maintained a lead in the 30s for quite some time, and even then, his generic ballot or his lead in the betting markets wasn't always as large as it is today. But it seems as if the chances for all the other candidates have reduced below 10%. Donald Trump at 72.3%, if we were to extrapolate it that way. That is an insane metric for an open race. It practically means that this primary is over. Now, if you remember back in 2016, Donald Trump left the primary with 46.5% of the vote. He ended up winning roughly 44.5% when all votes were counted, but that was enough to declare him the frontrunner, the nominee to be, right? He was the presumptive nominee for a long, substantial period of time. But we can see that a lot of candidates exited the race around the same points that many of these other Republicans are. We started off in this race in such a weird situation, right? Numerous candidates topping one another. You see Chris Christie, Huckabee, Paul, Bush, right? All neck and neck, but still in the low double digits. But as time went on, there started to become a clearer frontrunner. In that case, it was Jeb Bush, then immediately became Donald Trump, who went on to maintain this frontrunner status until a small period of time in which Ben Carson dethroned him nationally. That was very, very brief, eventually reverted back, Ben Carson, relative to where he was prior to, but then it started gaining and gaining and gaining, and then eventually it came to a point where Donald Trump was at 36% and Marco Rubio at 18% said, I'm out. This isn't a winning number. It came to a point where Ben Carson at the number of 9% said, I'm out. This isn't a winning number. Jeb Bush, someone who had practically legacy admission status to the presidency, is at 6%. He pulls out saying, this is not my way to go. These aren't winning numbers. And yet today, despite all these other candidates pulling out when Donald Trump can't even break 50 with so much primary, at this point, just a formality that Donald Trump will be the nominee and there is no consideration elsewise. And I think right now, I now agree with that conclusion. 6 months ago, I might have told you that there was a strong possibility that we could see some type of major, shakeup in the race. Or maybe not strong, but some possibility, right? It wasn't out of the question that Donald Trump was going to have some type of, for lack of a better word, divine intervention by the court system or by whichever system, the RNC, if he looks like he's on track to be found guilty in a criminal trial. There are so many factors at play 6 months ago that we thought might disrupt his significant lead over the rest of the GOP candidates. But now, about 3 months out to the election in Iowa, I am doubting it much, much more. I think we're less than 80 days away from the Iowa caucus. Isn't that crazy to think about? I mean, we are talking just around the corner. And let's talk about these Iowa numbers too, because aren't showing good results for anyone besides Donald Trump. Well, that's where it becomes tricky too for them. Right now, the Iowa Republican caucuses are estimated to give Donald Trump roughly 50.3% of the vote. Ron DeSantis at a measly 17%, all the rest below 10%, right? Including former Vice President Mike Pence, who's at 3.5% as a former vice president. Look at New Hampshire, the next state that will be up. The Republican primary here, Donald Trump at 45%. Guess who's in second place? Not Ron DeSantis. It's Nikki Haley. That could be crucial to ending Ron DeSantis' campaign because he needs second place. He needs a strong second place showing. He needs what Joe Biden got in Nevada in 2020, something that could resurge energy, even though there is a clear, at the time, it was Bernie Sanders, a clear front runner that was leading in the delegate status. That's what Ron DeSantis needed from New Hampshire. He's not getting it. Move over to South Carolina. You can guarantee he's not getting it here too, because guess what? Donald Trump's at 47.8%, but you know who's in second place? Not Ron DeSantis. It's Nikki Haley. And according to some of these metrics, you know who's not in third place? Ron DeSantis. You see here that in some of the numbers that we find, Tim Scott defeats Ron DeSantis. That's not far out of the question. He's within polling error of defeating Ron DeSantis in the state of South Carolina. I might have just said New Hampshire. I meant South Carolina. 1.5% differentiates Senator Tim Scott and Governor Ron DeSantis. So in these very early states, he needs slam dunks. These rest of these candidates need slam dunks because Donald Trump is getting them. Donald Trump is leading by 33 in South. Maybe this one will be different. Maybe the numbers on the screen will be different. And guess what? They aren't. Donald Trump leads in the most recent poll from CNN by 52%. Trump 65, DeSantis 13, Haley 6, Ramaswamy 4, Pence 3, Christie 2, Stott 2, Burgum 1, Elder 1. 1. The highest here of any of the candidates, 13, but Donald Trump at 65%. If that doesn't tell you everything you need to know, I think, that's something we should take a step back and look at and say, this is the metric that determines it all. These 4 early states are the prime time for candidates to drop out of the race, because you know what happened in 2016 was that the withdrawals from the race for Jeb Bush happened after South Carolina. And it seems as if, there wasn't that much in between here. So we'll reduce it down to a year because polling went all the way back to 2013. So we'll reduce it down to a year to put things better into perspective. Start of 2015, leading into May 2016, Bush was in the lead. But then Donald Trump maintained this lead, and candidates began to drop and drop and drop and drop. But then by the time we reached primary season, right, you saw major withdrawals. Rick Santorum was out, right? Rand Paul was out. Chris Christie was shortly out. Then it was down to 6 candidates here. Trump, Cruz, Rubio, Kasich, Carson. This is around the time of New Hampshire. Okay, they get through New Hampshire. Then South Carolina hits. Boom. Jeb Bush is supposed to win this state. He's out. Doesn't win the state. Donald Trump does. Then you head over into Super Tuesday. Okay, wait a second. Ben Carson, now he's out. Then it's Kasich, Rubio, and Cruz. Okay, what happens in Super Tuesday? Marco Rubio loses Florida. Even though he's at 19% nationwide, he loses Florida. And it's clear that the consensus here could go between Kasich and Cruz and could combine forces and defeat Donald Trump. Nope, Rubio's out, and he doesn't throw his weight. Doesn't throw his weight in the way that he should in order to defeat Donald Trump. So you know what happens to Donald Trump's numbers when Rubio's out? It goes from 32 all the way up to 43. Who saw bumps too? Cruz, okay, by a few points, right? Kasich, nothing. And that's the problem. You saw a lot of these candidates, they couldn't combine forces, and Donald Trump became this figure who was unbeatable, even though they had numbers that were higher than where Republicans are today. So that's why I'm wondering what the basis is for a lot of this campaign strategy. I think right now, my advice to many of the candidates that are now Asa Hutchinson, Doug Burgum, Tim Scott, at some point you no longer become an electable, viable Republican nominee, right? You could be someone's VP, but you probably won't be president this election cycle, and that's what you have to deal with. And I think a big problem with the Republicans back in 2016 and, wanting to defeat Donald Trump, because I will say, though Donald Trump is nearing 60% in primary support across the country, that 40% very clearly is not going with him for a reason. They have other people who they believe would be better fit for the presidency than Donald Trump. That's fact, right? That's why they're choosing him, though they are presented with the option of him. But right now, there is no possible way that any of the consolidated vote, you take every undecided, you take every voter for DeSantis, Haley, Ramaswamy, Pence, Christie, the list goes on, combine them together, you still see, because Donald Trump hasn't been able to put himself above the majority, he's not going to lose. In fact, best case, you could see for GOP candidates besides Donald Trump is if everyone consolidates behind DeSantis or Haley, because I think those are the only two at this point who have a viable shot nationwide. If Donald Trump was to remove himself from the nomination process, I think, selectively or forcefully by the court systems, whatever it might be, I think Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis would dish it out for or for first place at that point. But those two candidates, I think if you were to throw your support entirely behind any of them, it'd be 58.8 to 41.2. That's how the numbers would fall down. But we have to remember, it wasn't always like this, right? Donald Trump wasn't always in the strong 50%. In fact, for periods of time from November 2022 to around March 2023, right after the cataclysmic midterms for the Republican Party, you can see here leading up to Election Day in November 2022, Republicans were expecting Donald Trump to carry them to victory. Well, guess what? It doesn't happen. Ron DeSantis jumps up nearly 10 points and then was within 13 points of defeating Donald Trump nationally. Those were good numbers for Republicans because if you added Mike Pence, you added Nikki Haley, and the rest of the candidates, you were neck and neck, if not defeating Donald Trump. But obviously that didn't happen. Time went on. Donald Trump was given ample ammunition and time to go after Ron DeSantis and the rest of the candidates, and it worked perfectly. And now Donald Trump is on track to nearly every single debate. There's been two. We have seen Donald Trump improve following the debate. Nikki Haley has seen moderate improvements in New Hampshire and nationally, but that's it, right? Oh, big whoop, you go from 4% to 8%. Yes, it seems significant to you and your campaign, but realistically, it's not a big enough shift that draws any type of headline. Following the first debate, there were some metrics that seemed to suggest that voters actually paid attention to the debate, that people were very, very invested in how the debate performances went. And we saw numbers change for Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis. But then the next day, 2 days after, polls refuted those changes. They seemed to be instantaneous, as if it needed to happen an hour before the Iowa caucus for it to mean anything. But besides that, the voters reverted back to their base level, which was supporting Donald Trump. And so when I see the remainder of these candidates, some of them won't even make it on the debate stage, right? Won't even be able to qualify. And so now they're just running campaigns without a voice, with just ground game in Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina and Nevada at this point, and that's it. That's all that they have, and chances are it won't be enough. And chances are for all of them, including DeSantis, including Nikki Haley, it will not be enough. And the question is, when do the candidates themselves realize that they're running for second place? Because that's exactly what they have promised they are not doing. But I think for the first time in GOP primary history, it has always been one or the other, including Donald Trump. He lost Iowa in 2016, if we remember, to Ted Cruz. I think this is the first time in GOP primary history that we will see it happen. Now, history might look on it differently and say it was technically an incumbent's race. It's a different type of circumstance. It doesn't count. But I think right now that will show the true display of Donald Trump's influence and impact on the Republican Party and the grip that he still very much has on the modern-day GOP, something that none of these other Republicans have been able to track. And in terms of enthusiasm, it isn't even a question. Amongst Republican primary voters, according to the most recent Suffolk University USA Today poll, in the question, how enthusiastic are you about Trump as the Republican nominee on a scale of 1 to 10, 44% say 10 out of 10. In contrary to President Biden, and these numbers, just 15% of Democrats say 10 out of 10 for President Biden. So you see here that on the GOP side, much more riled up, much more enthusiastic, and an overwhelming amount, well above 5, which means this is enough to give Donald Trump the nomination with no question, and it seems as if this primary is becoming more and more of a formality rather than an actual competitive race. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 Republican primary election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.